And welcome back to Bands and Humans podcast. I am your host, Bands, and you are the humans. This is episode 9. And today I have a very special guest with me. Is someone I consider a brother, a friend, an uncle, and is almost old enough to be my dad, but is still quite close to me. And is also someone I look up to, and it's Mhleli Linda, also known as Uskwili Kansele. King, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm awesome. Yeah, King. Welcome to the podcast, and I'll have you know, Guti, you are actually the first person to be featured on Quotes of the Week feature, and also be on the podcast. So you just made history on Bands and Humans podcast. Yeah.
Wow.
How are you, King?
Amazing. I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. Hey, we're meeting in strange times, and we're trying to navigate under the circumstances, which is why we are here. Would have loved to have this interview in person, but we have to make do with what we have, and brings us here now. And yeah, just to bring us back to the quote, I actually wrote it down just so I can refer to it. You say, "No African is a foreigner on this soil. We cannot conform to someone else's ideas of who we are. These borders are an illusion." And the cool thing about that quote was that I caught you mid-conversation, and I actually, held on to it until I was able to write it down. So, when you said it, it sounded so profound to me that, I was able to retain it in my memory for I think about an hour or two before I actually wrote it down. But can you just expand on it and give me your perspective and your take from, where you were coming from with that?
Where I was coming from with that is effectively Africa is a continent of kingdoms. But these kingdoms were not necessarily divided, if I can put it that way. They were competing with each other to a point, but also working together. And let me explain what I mean by competition, because when you think competition, sometimes you think rivalry, and yet it doesn't necessarily equate to rivalry. But at the same time, you want to grow your kingdom. You want your kingdom to be great, and therein lies the secret of the unity of the continent and the harmony with which the continent remained for more than 1 million years before Europeans set foot and Arabs set foot on this continent. We were a continent, a people of huge kingdoms. And those kingdoms actually worked together to the extent that they actually formed what we know today as Egypt. Back then, it was Kemet, ancient Kemet. And you will understand when you look at Meduneta that it comprises all indigenous languages of the continent.
Wait,
Kemet itself.
Can I just cut you off there? When you refer to the word Meduneta, which might not be familiar to some of the listeners, what do you mean by that?
Meduneta is the language which our ancient ancestors in Kemet used. The word itself, Meduneta, means divine word, or the word of God. This is the original word of God.
Sure.
Everything that our ancestors did was divine. It had divinity in it. And when we look at the unity, we're looking at that which unified us. And we are not going to talk post-colonial era. We're talking prior to that, pre-colonial times. And when I talk about pre-colonial times as well, I want people to actually remember that Europeans were not the first colonizers. The Arabs were.
Mm.
But even before the Arabs, there was a fight for Africa, for this continent, by various other people. And there were invasions by the Hyksos, who were the shepherd kings, who were chased out of Kemet by our ancestors. These are the people who, when they were being chased away during that battle, drowned in the ocean. And our ancestors recorded that drowning on reliefs in Kemet. And that drowning is the one which the Jews and the Christians have taken and composed a story of Moses and the Egypts who drowned in the ocean.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's a stolen story, perverted, turned into lies, okay? Now, when we talk about this unity that I'm so passionate about, you will see that it's just that I wished I had slides so that I could actually share with you when I talk about the line of creation, the line of Zeb Tepi.
Sure.
Sheikh Anta Diop, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, the late great Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, one of our very profound scholars on the continent.
Yeah.
His research, together with Dr. Theophilo Benga, goes back to say to us that the origin of all humankind began in the Great Lakes region. Okay. Now that region is your modern day Burundi, Uganda, Congo. That is your Great Lakes region, Tanzania.
The belly of Africa.
So we all come from there. Okay. Then we migrated or moved. I wouldn't say, I don't like the term migrate. We moved and we inhabited the continent, the rest of the continent. But we didn't just inhabit the rest of the continent, we inhabited the rest of the world. We are the first people everywhere on the continent, okay? And then by process of genetic mutation, there were changes depending on the climate and so on. There were changes in terms of our facial features, our physical features, in terms of skin, hair texture, eyes, nose, and so on. So therefore, there were other people born from us, which is why scientifically you will find that the mitochondrial DNA links everybody to the first woman who is an African from Africa, okay? Whether you're Chinese, Indian, white, whatever, you are from this clay pot called Africa. Now, when we talk about the unity in ancient Kemet, it is comprised of all Africans who came into Kemet. Now, remember when I talked about the line of Zeb Tepi, and I talked about the creation. From that creation, we then went and inhabited the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. In our little corners, we started growing as a people. We started innovating. We started hunting, gathering, and so on. Life had to go on. We evolved. We developed. And hence culture developed, language developed, writing developed, and so on. Studies also developed because we find in Lebombo, right here in this country, the southern tip of the continent, the first calculator in the form of the Lebombo bone. And our ancestors took this calendar by starting the migration or the movement further north, And when they got to Congo, this Libombo bone became the Shangu bone. They moved further up into Sudan, Ethiopia, and eventually into Kemet, where this developed into the Teken, what the Greeks call the obelisk.
Sure.
Now, when this happened, it was not just an important marker, but I think it was the beginning of what we would call civilization. Okay, where people are conscious of themselves and they start forming things that aid their development, and they are conscious about the things that they do in order to achieve progress. I think that there are scholars who can obviously explain this better than I can, but for as a layperson, I like to see myself as a layperson who's seeking knowledge.
Sure.
So this very little knowledge that I have at least helps me to understand this is where we originated, this is how we originated, and it helps me to understand that indeed we are one people. How did the division come about? Well, because there was always this fight for Africa and its resources. Eventually what happened was 13 European states and America, the United States of America, got together at the behest of Otto von Bismarck in 1884 and 1885. And these white people decided how they were going to cut Africa and share Africa among themselves. Not a single African was at that meeting. Therein started the division, okay? Because even though the Arabs colonized a part of the continent and they enslaved our people, but they had not cut up the continent in the manner in which the Europeans did. So therein started the very first division, if I can put it that way.
Sure.
And unfortunately, this division also led to our downfall. And our downfall also started because we had people, African people, who also became part of that downfall. They sold us out in one way or another, okay? But that also formed a very small portion of our downfall, okay? The greatest portion of the downfall, which we can't get away from, was the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. And that set about a process of destroying everything on the continent that was progressive. Libraries were destroyed, okay? Indigenous knowledge systems were destroyed. Cultures were destroyed. Spiritual systems were destroyed.
Languages as well, yeah.
Languages, exactly. You know, we all had to take on one or the other language of the colonizer. If you were colonized by the English, you took on English. If you were colonized by the Portuguese, you spoke Portuguese. If you were colonized by the Spanish, you spoke Spanish. If you were colonized by the French, you spoke French, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's basically where our downfall started, because what we are living in now is still a system of oppression. The fact that we have countries, those countries are determined by the Europeans during that Berlin conference. And now what is happening is you find in these countries Africans who are deemed foreigners. If I, from this part of the country called South Africa, go into Botswana, I'll be looked at as a foreigner. If I go to Tanzania, I'll be looked at as a foreigner. If I go to Kemet, I'll be looked at as a foreigner. Malawi, Lesotho, Swaziland, I'll be looked at as a foreigner. And similarly, when we have our brothers and sisters from Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania, Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Congo, wherever, Burundi, when they come here, they are said to be foreigners. Now, mind you, bear in mind that we didn't determine these borders, okay? Our ancestors didn't have them. They were determined by racism during the Berlin Conference. So the first question one needs to ask is, why are we maintaining that system of oppression? That's the first question. The second question is, what will it take for us to stop seeing each other as foreigners? Because indeed the borders are not our own. So therefore, it takes me back to that quote that you so well remembered, to say that no African is a stranger anywhere on the continent. So I'm putting it now in perspective.
With our people, when they gave us these new doctrines and new languages, you know, what psychological effects does that have on one's mind when you are stripped from your indigenous tongue or your mother tongue to a foreign one? And, you know, how did these people who come from, you know, the small region all the way in the north, you know, achieve such a monumental thing where it's like they came to Africa and were able to navigate their way through and divide a people that was so united, divide a people that was so in tune with one another and in tune with the environment? You know, like how and what type of force does it take for them to be able to do that?
Now, the one thing that we must not forget is the fact that in the fight that we were faced with, the colonizers also used our good nature against us. They used Ubuntu against us. So we understood the concept that I am because you are. But it goes further than I am because you are. I am because the tree is. I am because the bird is. I am because the air is. I am because the soil is. So by so saying, God lives within me and God lives around me. Now, they have taken that concept out of us, created this white man in the sky with a long beard, and said, this is your God. So therefore now it takes away who we are. That is why they had to bring in Christianity. But whilst they're bringing in Christianity, they also bring in the gun. So that they can make examples of some of our ancestors by killing a few in front of the others. You therefore intimidate the others, so then they take on Christianity by force. And people tend to forget that that's how Christianity was taken on. No African said, hey, bring this thing here, I like it. You know, people had to die in order. And even in this country, we know that if you had a hut, a grass hut in your yard, you had to pay tax so that they would discourage you from having a grass hut. Okay?
Why is that? Why? What's the significance of having a grass hut?
The significant for us, a grass hut could mean a number of things, because ngesintu, ngesiZulu, kungaba indlu yogogo, so it's an ancestral home. It can be indlu yogogo, the ancestors from your maternal side.
For your altar, right?
Yes, yes. Umsamo wakho,
yes.
The shrine is in there. So it has a lot of meaning. So when they break that down, they take away your shrine. They take away Indlu Yogogo. And that is why they had to then put us in hostels and put us in four-roomed houses, because in a four-roomed house, the yard is too small for you to create umsam. It's too small for you to create Indlu Yogogo, because that's the first house that you create.
Yeah.
Uma uthola umhlaba. Before you build your house, upendula isoy, which is ufaka abantu abadala. After which, waka Indlu Yogogo. That's the first house that you build on that piece of ground that you have. Okay? Now, kubalulekile ukwakha indlu yogogo. Bese-ke ufaka isibaya. But because uselokishini uno 4-room, uyakha kanjani indlu yogogo?
Yeah.
Usibeka phi isibaya.
And there's no soul to turn. Everything's cemented. Yeah.
Yes. So that takes us away from who we are. Okay, and then we have to take on this foreign God, this Christian God. And people tend to forget as well how Christianity started. Okay, and it is a foreign concept. Yes, it's true. It is a foreign concept. But we need to go back to the history of how Abrahamic religions began. They were never ours. Even if we look at Akhenaten, who is, can I say, the father of monotheism?
Yeah, he definitely is. Yeah, he definitely is.
Yes. But that monotheism was of a different type. Do you understand? And I'm saying it's of a different type because people need to also understand that when Alexander the Horrible invaded Egypt, from that point on, they stole papyri, they stole tablets, they stole the writings in tombs, in temples, in pyramids that were from our ancestors. Okay, and it was Ptolemy Philadelphus during the Ptolemaic era. Ptolemy Philadelphus is the one who then assisted the Jews or the Hebrews, however they decide to call themselves, Jews, Hebrews, potato, same thing. He assisted them to write their first book, which is their Bible, effectively.
Yeah.
Because I think the Torah is more of like a law book, more than just the Bible. But it contains their laws and whatever, which are derived from this anyway. So you could say it's the same thing. So they started writing from our writings. Okay, now let's go back a little bit because I want us to view this in perspective so that we understand in terms of the timelines, what came first. Let's go before the beginning of Kemet, before the founding of the civilization of Kemet. Then we look at the Twa people, for example, of the Great Lakes region. Those were actually the first people to write down anything. Okay, so
on paper
our ancestors,
on paper or like inscription on stone?
On stone, in tablets. Because paper effectively was invented in Kemet.
In Kemet as papyrus.
Yeah. Yes. But they wrote on stone. Okay. And they were the first people to write down anything theosophical. So in other words, the belief in terms of spirituality, understanding what spirituality is, the difference between the spirit and the body, the difference between the soul and the spirit, and so on and so forth, those were actually conceptualized by the Twa people. Long before, I think it was about 1 million years or so, before the formation of Kemet. Okay. That influence then went into Kemet, which is why you will find the Twa people, statues of the Twa people, and their musical instruments in Kemet, because
Sure.
the people in Kemet also paid tribute to the Twa people because they were the foundation of Kemet, or
Mm-hmm.
part of a huge part of the foundation of Kemet.
Mm-hmm.
So when the first pharaoh, the first Nesut of Kemet, Nama, when he founded Kemet, he took a lot of those influences into Kemet. So then Meduneter developed from that.
Mm-hmm.
Spirituality, the Kemetic spirituality developed from that. Now, what we understand from the research by Dr. Ivan van Sertima, Ivan van Sertima's research, Dr. Ivan van Sertima states that Kemet was 55,000 years old
Mm-hmm.
by the time the first European came into the continent. So do you understand what that means? Because effectively what this means is that the Twa people who were living about 1 million years before the establishment of Kemet
Mm-hmm.
started writing, okay? And after that, the civilization of Kemet developed, okay? And it included all people from the entire continent, from the south, the Dogon people,
Mm-hmm.
the people in Somali, the people in Sudan, the people in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Congo, you name it.
It's just a collaborative
Okay?
space and you booming with unity.
Exactly.
With unity talking
Exactly.
about. Yeah. Mm.
Because Kemet was essentially a place of storage and
Mm-hmm.
perfection. That is why you will find that the first pyramids started here in the south,
Mm-hmm.
right here in Mpumalanga. Okay?
Mm.
And that fed into the pyramids in Sudan. And from the pyramids in Sudan, you then have the first pyramid, which was built by Imhotep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Imhotep was the friend of the pharaoh, the Nesut Djoser.
Mm.
Okay, so he built the first step pyramid. Okay, Imhotep.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, he built that pyramid, which was at that time the largest structure in the entire world. Okay, now the influences of that came from Kush, the Kushites, Sudan, which they also took from Abattoir in the south, right here.
Yeah.
We have Abattoir right here, you know, in the south, because Abattoir came from the north after the formation of, or the birth of the first human beings, who then moved, you know, all over the continent. So Abattoir came here and they built the pyramids. Okay. Now, when you talk about that civilization as a Kemet, we understand from Dr. Ivan van Sertima and also Dr. Yusuf Ben Yokanen that by the time the first white person came onto the continent or into the continent, all pyramids had been built, all of them. We understand from the Christian story that Moses allegedly rescued Jewish slaves from Kemet, from Egypt. Now, these Jewish slaves were very special in that they were the ones who allegedly built the pyramids, the temples, and the structures of importance in Kemet, okay? Now, what Moses was doing then was rescuing artisans, architects, draftsmen, you name them, bricklayers, you name them,
Yeah.
you know. So he was rescuing people with tremendous skill.
Mm.
The question then is, when you look at Jerusalem or any part in the East, you don't see
Any sort of
that
evidence.
level of construction. Yes, you don't see
Yeah.
that level of construction translated into anything that is built in the East.
Mm-hmm.
So then it doesn't make sense that I could be a civil engineer, taught how to make a bridge in Holland the way that they make a bridge. And when I come to South Africa, I don't utilize what I've learned, and I build something completely different.
Yeah.
Yes, the design might be different, okay? But the science behind it needs to be the same. For example, the way in which the pyramids were built,
Mm-hmm.
you will see that the stones line up in a particular way. They are joined in a particular way,
Yeah.
okay? The foundations are made in a particular way. So whether the Jews in Jerusalem are building a house, they're building a temple, you should see these basic elements in terms of the construction of their foundations, the way the stones are laid, and so on and so forth. But we don't see any of those things in any structure. So then it has to be a lie that the Jews built anything in Kemet. If we go to the story of Adam and Eve,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where Eve allegedly gave Adam the forbidden fruit. This story is on the relief, on a few reliefs in Kemet, okay? It is actually the story of one of the greatest Nesud deities in Kemet, okay? The one whose name is so terribly butchered by the Greeks by calling him Ramses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, his name is Usama Adra Setependra Ra Mesu Mary Amun.
Hey.
Beautiful name.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah.
This king, right, had trouble in terms of leading his people because there was a famine that was starting in Kemet and so on. And he prayed for wisdom to be able to get his nation out of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So his wife comes along, Shanu, Queen Shanu comes along, takes a fruit from the tree of knowledge and gives him the fruit and tells him, with this fruit, you now will gain the wisdom to rule your people. Because there was always a duality. In Kemet, there's always a duality. So if there's a female, there's a male. If there's a negative, there's a positive. We've gone through that in the study of Set, the principle of Set, how necessary Set is, you know. So we went through the season of Set, and
Yeah,
now we are in the
and
season of Ma'at.
Set being the brother of Asa, which was, termed Osiris by the Greeks, but we know the real name for him is Asa. So
Exactly.
yeah, and Set is responsible
Exactly.
for actually the dismemberment or the murder essentially of his brother
Of Asa, yes.
of Asa, and then bringing in Heru to come in and avenge his father's death, and thus bringing in the whole cycle or the story of ancient Egyptian or Kemetic, as we know now, that whole story is actually about our own self-redemption, not just speaking on it from a spiritual perspective. But yeah, just please continue on with your point there
Yes.
on Set. Yeah.
Yes. So I was just trying to emphasize or make the point about duality, how important duality is.
Mm-hmm.
that symmetry in life. You have a left hand, you also have a right hand. You have a left eye, you have a right eye. You have a left ear, you have a right ear. The symmetry in life, the duality, okay? So it does not necessarily mean that because the one is opposite to the other, it is an opposing force or energy. You see, so it might very well be a complementing energy.
Sure.
And said is a complementing energy. You can never experience daylight without night.
You
can never experience sunshine without rain.
Sure, sure.
So these are opposites, but they are complementary. They are not opposing or oppositions of each other. Okay. Now, when we look at this story of Usema Adra Setependre Ramesu Meriamun and his wife Shanu, the Greeks, many of whom were openly homosexual, many of whom were patriarchal or chauvinistic, let me put it that way, because the term patriarchy seems to, I think, is used incorrectly, because we also have matriarchy. And I think that these are institutions which are actually very important, and I think they need to be utilized or seen in their correct contexts.
And in balance with each other as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not bad to have a matriarch. It's not bad to have a patriarch. But let's look at the chauvinism, okay, where the Greeks did not believe anything good could come from a woman, which is the absolute opposite when it comes to us Africans, because we do not even debate the equality of a woman, the importance of a woman. Okay? When we look at our indigenous culture here in the South, as I'll speak from my perspective as a Zulu man, okay? In order for me to be realized or recognized as a man or accepted as a man, I need to take a wife. No matter how old I am, if I have not taken a wife, I am still a boy.
You know, you don't transcend to the next level.
Exactly. Now, if it takes a woman to make a man, just how important is a woman?
Sure. Now we're speaking about that divine feminine, that divine feminine.
Exactly. So we don't debate the importance of a woman. We know the importance of a woman. Even when she is a girl, the importance of a young girl in a family is very, very, very significant, in a sense that there are certain things that young maidens do. For example, praying for rainfall. Virgin maidens are the only ones who can pray for rain because they're in a pure state. Their bodies are pure. So that tells you something special about a woman, even from a young age.
Sure.
That's how we see women. Okay? It is because of Christianity. Because, mind you, the Christian Bible forbids women, for example, from talking in church, for participating in certain rituals. It forbids women from becoming priests. Okay? So that is where this chauvinism nonsense comes from. As Africans, we don't have it. And I'll call it what it is. People might get offended.
Call a spade, yeah.
I don't have the time to romance a fork into a spade. I'll call it what it is. Okay?
Yeah.
So we don't have any such teaching that teaches the importance of a man over a woman. Okay? A woman is of utmost importance. No matter how strong I am as a man, I wouldn't exist without a woman. So who is the first person who is important to me? The woman.
Being the
so
mother.
As a result, yes, As a result, if people understood that concept and how we saw women as Africans, we wouldn't be talking about gender-based violence.
Mm.
But we are talking about gender-based violence because each time, or more often than not,
Mm-hmm.
these so-called Christians go to church, they get told just how insignificant a woman is. The preacher will say it. If he doesn't say it, the actions in terms of the goings on will say it. You know, and that in your subconscious already says you are more important than a woman. So therefore, you will feel justified to beat a woman. That is not the African way. When we look at this unity that we are talking about in Africa, that existed before the Berlin Conference, we also need to understand that the unity, when we are talking about bringing it back, we are talking about looking at pre-colonial history. Certainly, if our ancestors could have kingdoms and rule with kingdoms for more than a million years, the civilization of Kemet alone is 55,000 years older than
the first appearance in
Europeans.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and we understand that they had a system of kingdoms. Okay. Now, if that system worked so well for 55,000 years, why must we bother ourselves with democracy and communism and socialism, all of these European constructs? First of all, they're European. We can't identify with them. There's nothing African about them. Okay? All that is happening is people are trying to fit in to these systems. So you're trying to, it's basically the exercise of trying to fit a square into a circle. We are one people with the people of DRC. When they speak Lingala, I speak Zulu. We hear each other perfectly. Okay, with the exception of a few words here and there, but it's effectively the same language, a different dialect. Now, we hear and understand each other. That tells me that my Congolese brothers are my brothers. Indeed, we are one people. Okay? We are one people right through the continent. So these borders are not helping us. For me to sit in South Africa and say we have the best economy or one of the best economies in the continent and we are great and we've done this, we've done that, is myopic, very stupid, because it suggests that my Congolese brothers must be left behind. It suggests that my Zimbabwean brothers must be left behind. My brothers in Botswana, in Swaziland, in Lesotho, or twice Eswatini, mind, it's no longer Swaziland. But for me, it doesn't make any sense. This is Mweno Mutapa, okay, which includes Eswatini, it includes Zimbabwe, it includes South Africa. The great empire of Mweno Mutapa. Okay, it includes it includes Mozambique. This is who we are. And that is why I keep saying, like Ubab Credo says, South Africa can go to hell for all I care. I also say, I echo his words. I don't see myself as a South African. I'm not patriotic in that way.
This imaginary concept in any case.
Exactly.
You know, and then now they created this whole idea of nationalism, which people attach themselves to based on, rhetoric that plays on the psychological aspect of who we are. Yet it's predicated on something, that never existed in the first place and still doesn't exist. You can't just put
precisely
a fence around the place and then, have it be something that becomes real. It's only real up here. And that's why I corresponded or that quote of yours resonated with me so much because you said that the borders are an illusion, you know, they're just
Exactly.
an illusion. Mm. So just in short, like in terms of when we're speaking about unity, because we see that we won't be able to achieve it while these borders stand. You know, that's a fictitious unity or an idea of unity that if it's predicated on still us being separated by borders that were created for us. So for you, just in short, what vision do you have in terms of this African unity do you have, and how do you see it playing out?
My vision for the unity
Mm-hmm.
is that we need to forget about structures like the African Union. It's absolutely useless. The European Union, by comparison, is not even 20 years old, even,
Mm-hmm.
but they have achieved probably 10 times more than the African Union has achieved, and yet the African Union is older. That idea was born here.
Mm-hmm.
And what people seem to miss is that Europe is a system of countries which was decided upon by Europeans themselves. Africa is a system of countries which was decided by Europeans on our behalf. It doesn't make sense to me. Why are we still in that system? So for as long as we are in this pathetic system, okay, there can be no progress. The African Union is the most useless body ever to exist. It is not even funded by Africans, it's funded by Europeans. That goes to show you just how useless they are. They can't even fund themselves. Okay? It makes no sense. People were celebrating Africa Day, but we have a place in South Africa called Lindela that houses people who are deemed to be foreigners to South Africa. You don't find Chinese in Lindela, you don't find Indians in Lindela, you find Africans. So while people are celebrating, yay, Happy Africa Day, on the other hand, you have people who are of African descent who are deemed to be foreigners are in jail awaiting deportation. What nonsense is that? For as long as we have these divisions where any African can be seen as a stranger or a foreigner anywhere on the continent, I will not support that system at all. Okay? And that is partly, like I said, partly my disagreement with Pan-Africanism, is that it seeks to establish unity within those structures. And I'm saying, no, those structures need to be broken down. Now, if we can't break them down physically at this point, at least let us do so mentally.
Yeah.
And let us do so in practice in terms of why don't we create our own systems where we don't have to rely on these other false oppressive systems. Let's start talking to each other. Let's start trading with each other. Let's start communicating with each other, on every level possible. Because we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Our ancestors did it. There's no reason why we can't do it. What we need to be doing for our future is to do everything in our power to empower our children, to give them the best opportunity to be the job, to give them the best opportunity to create their own economy, their own education, their own hospitals, okay? Their own factories, their own engineering firms, whatever, all of that, so that they can then achieve success. They can then, our young people are the only ones who can get to this unity that is so elusive. Clearly, our predecessors have failed, and they're continuing to fail. So there's nothing for us to look forward to there.
Basically, all in all, we cannot have a fictitious based, or a unity based on this fictitious system, rather than say, we need to find ways of building newer structures that are not predicated on the oppression of the minority in favor of the majority in favor of the minority,
in favor of the minority.
in terms of financial status. So and also, like, the biggest message or biggest takeaway for us as African people is that we need to unify, starting here within our minds first of all, before we can even start talking about breaking down the borders. And we need to see each other as brothers and sisters and not other, because we are all one, essentially, based on the history that you have just shared with us, based on the history you've given and shed light on as well. So thank you, King. And this was a very comprehensive and in-depth conversation on the history of Africa, and in terms of the governing systems that we had, the law structures, the legislative structures, and it just shed a lot of light in terms of the fact that we did have. It wasn't that we never had. Africa had education systems. Africa had academic structures on its own, and that was taken away from us and given back to us as something else that we couldn't even recognize. So we thought we didn't actually have it. So we need to reclaim and go back and research and be frivolent about doing this. And it's all about the unity of our people. But thank you for coming through, King. And we've been meaning to do this for a while now. I'm glad it finally happened.
So am I.
Yeah.
So I'm privileged that I could have airtime on your show. I have tremendous respect for you as a young man. We I've learned so much from you as well, and that keeps me going.
Sure.
That's why I keep saying that you young people are the future, and if we don't stick close to you, then it means we don't understand the future and we don't love it.
In terms of you saying that the future belongs to the youth and we are actually the future. There's another saying, ngesizulu futhi, uthi indlela ibuzwa kwabadala. So we will take the helm, being guided by the wisdom and foresight that you guys already have, foresight and hindsight that you guys are, have bestowed upon you already in terms of the experience and your time spent on the planet and all the knowledge that you've gained and acquired. So that's why we need to have these types of close consultations and interactions between the age gaps, and bridge and sort of bridge that gap and create structures where we can have these conversations. And I think, for the most part, that's why I have the podcast here, so that we can facilitate these type of conversations and have people be able to access them later on, and for as long as they need to. So thank you, King. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Sure. And then to everyone who hasn't subscribed, and for those who are watching right now and haven't subscribed, please do. And this has been Mhleli Linda with Bands in the Humans podcast. Peace.